Welcome to the Technacy and Innovation chart video. In this video we'll look at Technacy Genre, otherwise known as technology type. So why use Technacy Genre? Well, basically the world is becoming increasingly complex, and it's very easy for learners, parents and teachers to feel somewhat overwhelmed by all the different types of technologies about them. But exactly how do we identify what is a type of technology? And why is it useful to know this? Technacy theory provides the learner and teacher a way to organise and classify some of this complexity. It offers a way to understand, choose, design, and especially to create technological solutions a bit more wisely, because Technacy theory provides guidelines of what to consider when you do this. You see, the world is becoming increasingly complex. We have technologies in pottery, in computing, in cooking, in woodwork, in metalwork, in textiles. The list goes on. Trying to make sense of all this is very important in education. It helps us also stage expectations, and we will get on to the Technacy and Development chart, where a teacher can help identify expectations in the way they plan their projects in schools. So how can we teach people to make sense of it all? For a start, technologies aren't simply items that exist in isolation. They are in themselves always systems of other things joining in. We see this system effect happening more and more as technologies become smarter, as some corporations would refer. And it's this linked up effect that is very important. The work behind linkages is fundamental to the way we understand technologies. In addition, designed ideas need to work in their intended context of application. In fact, technological knowledge is a contextual activity. The better one understands the context drivers to determine the success of an idea, the more one validates the technological knowledge being tried out. And so in this sense, technological knowledge is a way of knowing that's different to science. It is a way of knowing based on contextual synthesis, of developing solutions that meet contextual criteria. And this is a fundamental concept in technological education. So there are many things to consider in your purpose and context, from cost and time through to questions to ask on any level, but particularly in choices and directions of your design as they relate to the scope and scale of your solutions application. Contingencies are critical to knowledge validation in technology education. Cross-cultural and critical research behind Technacy education offers some ways to understand technology more holistically. It's important to understand that Technacy Genre came out of cross-cultural research in Central Australia, where the exchange of housing and services and equipment in remote areas reveals something very interesting about the way two cultures tried to service the issue of technological needs. And this is the origin of Technacy, which was born out of research back in the 1980s. Technacy helps to make sense of all this technology stuff for the learner, and can help all teachers plan learning about and with technologies more effectively by understanding the common set of parameters involved in all technological genre, and making sure that all these parameters are thoroughly rehearsed and experienced by the learner, particularly in how they work together in what we call a genre or technology type. So let's have a look at the basic elements of Technacy education. There are these 5 key elements of Technacy education, and they occur in 2 groups. The first group is identified by the tree and the digital codes underneath it. And we call this the materials. We transform materials. It doesn't matter which technology you're referring to, you are always shaping, transforming, manipulating something. We refer to this generic expression as the materials, and ultimately materials in some form come from our natural environment, both physical and digital. All technology types employ some system of tools, and we represent this by both the physical and mechanical type of tools that we tend to see in resistant materials, and we also show this in terms of the digital tools with a mouse pointer. So tool systems are things we use to transform our materials, both physical and digital. But these things, materials and tools, don't happen in isolation. We in fact only recognise things as manipulable materials or tools that are an advantage to our existing capabilities if we see them working together. And in this sense, you still need something called an agency. And since we are talking about human technological activity, it's the human agency we'll refer to for the rest of this Technacy and Innovation chart. And humans are embodied with insight, knowledge, skills, values, much of it socially defined, to help us express creatively and share and realise our ideas. And this brings us to the second group. The second group is a pairing. It's about purpose and context working together. So the contingencies that validate whether our designed ideas work in their intended context of application is critical to technological know-how and know-why. Technology is a context validation process. We form knowledge itself through the way we identify that things work in context. And again, this is quite different to scientific hypothesis testing. Here we want to embody the context rather than control it. Here we want to understand relationships rather than isolate variables. In technological knowledge, we are developing the capacity to synthesize ideas with reality. Technological knowledge is an ideas-reality synthesis activity, and this is one of the most ancient and most powerful forms of knowledge formation that we have in human history, and is quite longer in history than perhaps the modern scientific method. We also have the way these things work together. The way these things work together, materials, tools and agency, towards a purpose and context, is what's referred to as the Technacy genre, or technology type. In a moment we're going to go through all the different ways we can understand technology type. So let's have a look at how these elements work together. This is the basic unit of Technacy theory. Now we've used these diagrams to help identify a few critical features about how technology works. It doesn't matter whether you're working at the scale of pottery or at the scale of complex information systems. You still have the need to integrate materials, tools and your agency to develop ideas in context with a purpose in mind. So let's have a look at some of these genres. Now most of us and most cultures will have some form of direct relationship to nature. And here we find very common in human history is the first level order of technological development, where we form raw materials such as clay to form pottery. Pottery has a purpose in mind, sometimes ornamental, very often functional, and there's a context. You can't form pottery in contexts where you don't have the appropriate clay to do so. So you need materials, you need your tools, and you need agency. And when you bring these things together with meaning in a coherent way, you form the genre of pottery. Now this genre is distinct, it's identifiable, and it follows the principles of technacy of materials, tools and agency for a purpose and context in mind. Let's have a look at another genre that uses the same principles. Let's have a look at the idea of food service, food preparation. In this case, we've arbitrarily picked a festival dinner. Now the festival dinner is a particular context because you can imagine food scientists might have a different purpose and context in mind as opposed to a family dinner. You would need to draw on resources such as foodstuffs. You need to access your tool systems such as your cooking equipment. And these things only work together if there is an agent who has the insight to bring them together. And the way they learn is to see what food, tools and materials work together to form and satisfy the purpose and context in mind. And this creates validated knowledge. Let's have a look at another one. Here we have a genre common in schools referred to as textiles technology. Now textiles is a very interesting thing because the purpose and context of your textiles product can vary greatly, and that might determine how you go about solving a problem. So you do really need to emphasize this idea of getting your child to understand the purpose and context, and always focus back on what are we doing this for, and what are the things we need to satisfy to make sure our design idea works in its application. We could have designs for evening wear, for a wedding, for hardware in a built environment where builders need to be clothed. How you design for these things refers to your context of application. And so you'll be drawing on fabrics, you'll be drawing on tools and equipment, and you'll be drawing on designers and design ideas. How the designer, the materials, and the tools work together in a coherent way typically forms an identifiable genre. In this case, it's the Technacy genre on textiles. A very popular medium that we're seeing in genre coming through in contemporary society has got to do with information and communication technology. Let's have a look at some of the examples of information and communication technology through digital media. Here we see purpose and context expressed in terms of computer-aided designs and websites. These things occur because we're manipulating materials such as digital form and digital information. We undertake that manipulation through devices and tool systems such as computing devices. But these things only happen because there is an agent. There is somebody with insight to understand how they work together, but particularly how they work together to form the products we see in the centre, our purpose and context. Finally, we have a very popular type of genre in schools, mainly because the material is quite sympathetic. I personally like working with wood, and it's one of my favourite mediums. But let's consider this. Designing a table and set of chairs is quite different for an outdoor setting than it might be, say, for a corporate boardroom setting. But nevertheless, we draw on materials from the environment, we access a peculiar set of tools which are for those materials and not for, say, textiles and digital materials. And we need an agency, some knowledge to safely and adequately use those materials to achieve our purpose and context. And when we do make furniture that seems to work for the client really well, we've learnt something. This is a knowledge formation and knowledge validation process, quite unique to technology education and no other subject in the curriculum. So how these things work together is referred to as the Technacy genre. And here we have the generic conditions for a Technacy genre. Every genre, every type of technology has its peculiar set of materials, tools and agency which are worked together for purposes and contexts in mind. And so now we have a framework, the Technacy framework, which allows you to set projects to appropriate level of expectations by defining just how many tools, materials and what kind of knowledge is required, and particularly focusing on what kind of scale and scope needs to be satisfied in the project purpose and context parameters. Setting the expectations is a key way to use the Technacy genre.